it's time for my November reading wrap up. Hello, beautiful people. How are you doing? My name is Jackie, and in today's video, I'm going to discuss all of the books that I read in the month of November 2024. This month, I read 7 books for a total of 2,452 pages. My average rating was 3.5 stars, the exact same as October. I also DNF'd one book in November, which was The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood. I read over 100 pages of this, maybe 200 pages, I don't remember, but ultimately I was just kind of bored and there was nothing really wrong with it per se. I just wasn't enjoying myself and just didn't feel motivated to continue. I know some of my subscribers were excited to hear my thoughts on this, so I'm sorry that I didn't finish it. It wasn't bad, I just wasn't really vibing with this. But let's get to the books that I did actually read. There are timestamps in the video description if you want to skip ahead to certain books that you're interested in. First, I read Dracula by Bram Stoker. I gave this a 4-star. I started this at the end of October for Halloween, but I had to finish it in November. I think most people understand the basic premise of Dracula, even if they haven't read it. Obviously, Dracula, he's a vampire. This book kind of treats that like a reveal, but I think everybody knows that he's a vampire. And Jonathan Harker, his fiance, then wife, Mina, and several of their friends all team up to take him down. Because obviously we, the modern reader, know that Dracula is a vampire, it's kind of unintentionally comedic a little bit at the beginning of the book. This book is told in an epistolary format, basically meaning that it's told entirely through letters, diary entries, things like that. So at the beginning of the book, Jonathan Harker comes to Dracula's castle in Transylvania, and he's writing down in his diary about all these strange things related to his new host. Like, for instance, he never eats anything. Or there's one part where he's like, OMG, I looked out the window and I saw Dracula climbing down the castle like a lizard. And I know it's supposed to be a serious moment, but just the mental image of him climbing down the castle like a lizard, hilarious to me. And it's just getting progressively weirder and weirder for Jonathan. And I'm like, bro, he's a vampire. Run for your life. I read this book physically and also listened to some chapters on audiobook. There is a free audiobook included with Spotify Premium that's narrated by the British actor Mark Gatiss, so I listened to some of it via that audiobook, and I did enjoy this book, especially once we get into the part of the book where the characters are actually developing a plan for how they're going to try to defeat Dracula. I think that part of the book is when the tension and the action heats up a little bit, because it is a slightly slow start. Since obviously you already know that Dracula is a vampire, maybe some of the suspense that a reader in the 1800s would have felt isn't fully there, because when it's revealed that he's a vampire, like, every modern reader already knows that. So there's not necessarily that shock that there might have been in the past. I did really like Mina as a character and how she was very loyal and very resourceful, though I do think the latter half of the book definitely has more of those Victorian typical attitudes towards gender roles and men and women, which obviously, as a 21st century feminist, is slightly off-putting, but obviously that's how most men in this time period, and a lot of women too, would have felt, because that was just what society pushed as normal. But I did really like her as a character and her resourcefulness, positive traits, though there were some gender stereotypes in the latter half of the book especially. I did enjoy this. I can't say it's an all-time favorite classic, but I'm glad that I finally read it, and it was definitely a good choice for that spooky time of the year. After that, I read First Lie Wins by Ashley Elston, which I gave a 3-star. This book wasn't bad, but I have to say it was a disappointment. This book has over 4 stars on Goodreads, and I've seen so many people rate it 5 stars, describe it as a new favorite, as a page turner. And personally, I thought this book was fine, but I don't really understand why other people thought it was a page turner, because that just wasn't my experience. I can't say I was enthralled by it. This book is, in theory, a thriller, and it follows our main character, Evie Porter, though Evie Porter is not actually her name. That is the current identity she's been assigned by her mysterious boss, known only as Mr. Smith. And Mr. Smith has asked her to find out information about this man named Ryan, who, as Evie, she is now dating. But it turns out that in this small town, there might be someone who knows Evie's true identity, and when a death occurs, it may be foul play. Now, like I said, I don't think this book was bad. I just didn't get the hype about it because I saw so many people say this is a 5-star thriller, whereas I personally just didn't feel that strong urge to keep turning the pages. And there wasn't a wow moment in this book for me. There wasn't any reveal that really shocked me. I felt like it was just okay. And that's fine and all, but it did feel disappointing because of how hyped this book is. I do think this book could make a really good television show. I'm imagining it as like a Netflix miniseries. I feel like it might be more interesting on the screen because we do get a lot of Evie's past and identities that she's previously taken on for her work for Mr. Smith. So I feel like maybe if visually we could see all these schemes, all the different stuff that she's done in the past, it would have been maybe a little more interesting. But in book form, I just wasn't totally wowed by it. After that, I read another thriller that I'd heard really good things about, but again, was a slight miss for me, and that was Good as Dead by Susan Walter. Again, I gave this a 3. It wasn't bad, but I saw a lot of 5-star reviews for this book, so it was kind of disappointing because I just didn't see what other people saw in it. Our main character, honestly, I don't remember her name now, which I think shows you that the characters didn't make a strong impact on me. But basically, her husband was killed in a hit-and-run accident. So now a mysterious, let's call him a benefactor, is paying for her to live in this very fancy house for her and her daughter in a very fancy neighborhood, giving them lots of money so they can live the high life in exchange for keeping the involvement in the accident a secret. And we get a lot of different perspectives, both from our main character, her teenage daughter, Andy, the guy who lives across the street, and a man who works for the mysterious benefactor, sort of as like a fixer type character. And honestly, I don't remember a lot of the characters' names, to be honest with you, just because I didn't think they were bad characters necessarily, but they weren't memorable to me. I mean, I read this less than a month ago and literally no idea what their names were. I remember Andy. I remember him because the chapter is narrated by him, the storyline of him and his wife. I think that was the storyline in the book that I personally liked the best. They were the ones who I connected with the most. The book was not badly written at all, but the reason it was kind of disappointing to me is because I felt like the reveal at the end of the book was very, very obvious, and I knew where it was going for many chapters. So when we actually got to the end and that was the reveal, I was like, okay, was this supposed to be mysterious? Because to me, it was so obvious. I felt like the foreshadowing was a little heavy-handed. And it's also like one of those situations where there weren't that many people it could be. potentially. So it's not like there were a lot of different suspects to consider. It was just very obviously going in this one direction, and that's the direction it actually went. Ultimately, I felt the exact same way about Good as Dead as I did about First Lie Wins. These were two thrillers that I saw so many 5-star reviews for, yet while there was nothing wrong with the books per se, I just didn't understand why other people found the books so exciting, because for me, they weren't that page-turning, and the reveals at the end were fine. I just didn't see what other people evidently saw in these books, but they have received a lot of 5-star ratings, so you don't have to take my word for it, you know? I'm clearly the outlier here when it comes to these books. After that, I finally read The Woman in the Library by Sulari Gentile, which I have wanted to read for so long. I gave this book a solid 4-star. I did enjoy it. I don't think it was quite as game-changing as it needed to be to earn a 5-star from me, but I did enjoy reading it. This book is predominantly narrated by Freddie. Her real name is Winifred, but she goes by Freddie. And she is an Australian who is currently living in Boston for a writing residency, I think it is. One day she's at the Boston Public Library where she meets 3 strangers when they're all sitting near each other, and they strike up a friendship after they all hear a mysterious scream. Freddie later finds out that a woman was murdered at the library that day, and so she starts, thinking about this scream that they all heard and what happened to this woman. And what Freddie doesn't know, at least not at first, is that one of the people who was with her in the library that day is a killer. This book also has a very interesting framing device because Freddie's story is actually a manuscript that's being written by an author who I think her name was Hannah, but to be honest, I'm not really sure on that. And so we're getting this framing device of Hannah sending the chapters in her manuscript to this man who is a big fan of hers. Hannah is living in Australia, and the man that she's writing to is living in the Boston area. And so as the story goes, he keeps sending his feedback on what he's read. And as the book goes on, you just get the unnerving feeling that this man reading Hannah's manuscript is a bit sinister. And I really liked how we had the main narrative and also the narrative that's playing out through these emails from Hannah's reader. I forget his name now. I'm forgetting people's names this month. But I really did like how those two narratives were woven together. And there were several moments when I was reading the email exchange in particular where I was in my head being like, holy crap, this is creepy. And so the escalation of that plot thread did take me by surprise a few times. It was very unnerving. This book is kind of polarizing. It only has a 3.51 rating on Goodreads, which is fairly low, and honestly, usually a rating like that would scare me off, but I wanted to read this book anyway. And I have to say, personally, I enjoyed it. I felt like it was page-turning more so than the thrillers that I read this month. I do think that some people might be disappointed because really not that much of the book actually takes place in the library. It's just the initial chapters. So that may be disappointing for some people who really wanted more of that atmosphere. I also think because we're told very early on in the book that one of the people in the library that day is a killer, that could maybe take some of the suspense out for some people, since we already know, okay, one of these characters killed someone. But I still personally really enjoyed this book. It held my attention. I don't think it was quite a 5-star, but I thought it was a pretty good read, and I definitely want to read Sulari Gentile's next book, The Mystery Writer. Now, this month, I also read 2 historical fiction books inspired by Jane Austen, so I think I will talk about them together. First, the Jane Austen Society by Natalie Jenner. This was part of my Read It or Delete It 2024 TBR challenge. We'll link that video in the card. I tentatively gave this book a 3.5 stars. I wasn't really sure if it was a 3 or a 4, so I just met in the middle. This is a book taking place, I think, after World War II. Yes, just after World War II, in the village of Chawton, which is where Jane Austen spent some years of her life. Her brother owned the estate there. And so we're following multiple characters in this village who all love Jane Austen, and they team up together to attempt to buy the cottage that Jane Austen once lived in to turn it into a Jane Austen museum. And there actually is a Jane Austen museum in Chawton today. You can go to that house. I went there when I studied abroad. Hell, I'll link that video in the card too if you want to go see that. I think the reason I have mixed feelings about this book is because it was well written, and I would be interested in reading some more of Natalie Jenner's titles, but I do think because it has such an ensemble cast, I wasn't fully connected with every character. Maybe it was stretched a bit too thin, and if she had focused on a fewer number of characters, I could have gotten to know them on a deeper level. There are also several romantic threads, which were fine, but again, I think if we were just focusing on maybe one couple instead of 3, I think maybe then I would have felt more invested in the romantic resolution. So it was good. I enjoyed reading it. I just think there wasn't that level of connection and investment in the characters that I personally need to view a book as great. The other Jane Austen inspired book that I read in November was Miss Austen by Gil Hornby, or is it Jill Hornby? Honestly, I don't know how to pronounce her name, so my apologies. I gave this a 3-star. My mom picked out this book for me to read in my Have I Read It Yet challenge video. I'll link that in the card as well. So many things getting linked in the card today. This is a historical fiction book that's told in dual timelines. One timeline is in 1840 and the other is years earlier in the late 17 to early 1800s. And this book is predominantly following Jane Austen's older sister, Cassandra. In the 1840 timeline, a now 60-something-year-old Cassandra is going to stay with Isabella, who is the niece of Cassandra's deceased fiance. Cassandra is secretly trying to track down some letters from her now deceased sister Jane Austen because those letters contain some information that Cassandra does not want the world to potentially see someday. Then the past timeline is sort of following Cassandra and Jane when they were younger, their relationship, and the letters are all, connected to the events that are going back in that past timeline. Now, it is actually true that Cassandra Austen burned a lot of letters from her sister Jane, and nobody really knows for sure what was in those letters or why it is that she burned them. It's pretty much agreed upon that she was trying to protect her sister, wanting to make sure that she still had privacy, because obviously when you are a public figure, a very successful author, there are a lot of people who are invested in your personal life and want to know more about you. But obviously, because the letters were destroyed, nobody knows exactly what was in them, and this is basically the author's imagining of what those letters might have contained. Now, this is another book that I do think was legitimately well written, but my issue with it is I just found it kind of slow. Definitely a slow-paced book, and I was a little bored at times. So even though it was well written, well done, I just felt like the pacing didn't work for me. I also personally didn't love the character of Cassandra. I definitely think it's a me thing because without spoiling it, Cassandra does at times have a very self-sacrificing personality. And I'm not saying that's wrong. It makes sense given what the book tells us about her life, and I understand why she would be that way. Just for me personally, as a reader of this book, I would read about some of her decisions, some of her self-sacrificing behaviors, and it was just annoying to me personally. And that's just a me thing, you know? I understand why her character was written that way. I'm just saying I personally didn't like it. I found it very frustrating to read about her going down this path. Natalie Jenner also blurbed this book. Now listen, I don't think this was bad. Again, just I didn't love it. There is going to be a Masterpiece PBS miniseries in 2025. I do think I would still check that out. I think this, again, could be a story that might be more engaging in a visual medium, but we'll see. And finally, the last book that I read in the month of November was A Death in the Small Hours by Charles Finch. This is one of the Charles Lennox historical mysteries, and I gave this a 4-star. The Charles Lennox series follows our main sleuth as he solves crimes in Victorian era England. What I like about this series is that so far, I think it's very consistent in terms of quality. I haven't rated any of the books 5 stars, but there also hasn't been any book in the series so far that I didn't like. Sometimes with series, you have very high highs and very low lows, but I think this book series has been very consistent so far. In this book, Charles Lennox, his wife Lady Jane, and their infant daughter all go to Somerset to stay with Charles's uncle at his estate. Charles's uncle tells him that there has been an instance of repeat vandalism in the village, which is very unusual because they're a very tight-knit community that usually doesn't have crime. And so Charles is interested to see if he can investigate the vandalism and figure out who's behind it. But it's not long before these smaller crimes turn into murder. I actually think what surprised me the most about this book was not the reveal of who was behind the crimes, but actually I was surprised by who was the murder victim in the first place. I did not think that character was the one who was going to be killed. And I was also surprised by a romantic pairing that is revealed at the end of the book when we find out that these two characters are romantically interested in each other. I was surprised because I did not see those two as an item coming. So those were the parts of the book that did genuinely surprise me. In terms of the reveal of who is behind the crimes, I thought that was fine. I did get slightly annoyed at the end of the book because there are multiple reveals, and by the third one, I was like, OMG, like, come on. Two mystery reveals was enough. Do we really need a third one? But I think these books are definitely enjoyable if you are looking for a historical mystery series to read. There are still a lot of books that I need to get caught up on, so I will definitely be continuing this series. Another solid 4-star from Charles Finch's Charles Lennox series. So everybody, those are all of the books that I read in the month of November. Let me know in the comments, what did you read in November? What was your favorite read of the month and your least favorite? I would really like to hear from you. If you would like to show your support and let me know that you watched this video through to the end, why don't you leave your favorite heart emoji in the comment section down below so that I know you're still here. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a big thumbs up. It really does help me and my channel. Please also subscribe to my channel if you want to see more from me. I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye! I'll see you next time.